indigenous nations in Africa, no ceremony would start without singing, dancing, music, without saluting the ancestors, without saluting the plants, the animals, the minerals, the rocks, the trees, the mountains, all of which are part of our universe. When we talk about this unity of mind, body, and spirit, Africa really is on the map for this. That not only is spirit, and the things of spirit are sacred, that sacred permeates all of what in Buddhism is called all sentient beings. And so the mountains, the baobab tree, the earth under which the ancestors speak. In some traditions it's said, we vow upon the earth because it is the place where our dead lie. And what in the West we would call the human community, in many African cosmologies, is the community of the dead, the living, and the yet to be born. Unlike the concepts of Buddhism, where the goal of a spiritual life is to be removed from the plane, from the possibility of endless rebirth, in many African traditions, the very goal of existence is to reproduce, have children, and be born again and again in those children. That this place, even though it is acknowledged that there is sorrow, there is war, there are all kinds of things, this place, this realm in which the spiritual and the material interpenetrate, are joined together, this is where we want to be as humans, and this is where we want to come back again and again and again. Also, I wanted to start with something that brought in music and dance, because in the African world sense, in the African worldview, in many of them, music and dance are really highly developed arts. It is the music that readies the body for possession by the deity. We use music to make these frail human forms open to what is above or below. We celebrate the body. The body is sacred. And the works of the body, the works, because everything is spiritual, the way that we work is also touched by the spirit. So that when a goldsmith is working on gold pieces, in some communities it's felt that without the prayers, the chants, without honoring the spirit of gold, without honoring these components, nothing will be right. That in the body, that in work songs travel across the ocean. Yaya Diallo, who's an ethnomusicologist from West Africa, says, you know, in Africa, if you were going to go work on the field, and the fields are hot and it's difficult to work all day in the tropical sun, that you hire a drummer and perhaps a griot, and you go out to the field and you're tired and it's hot, and the griot begins to sing songs praising your ancestors, talking about those who came before you, those on whose shoulders you stand. And also the drummer plays rhythms that enable us to do this work in a way that brings together spirit, body, heart, that this integral nature is so significant and so important. I like to talk about the human technologies of music and dance. And in particular, you know, what I often say is when the volcano erupted and almost all the village died, it is our ability to mourn, to cry out, that saved our existence as human beings. And when I think of my ancestors traveling on the slave ships, 18 inches high, packed literally like sardines, lying in their menstrual fluids, lying in their excrement, the dead and dying chained together, not even knowing each other's language, having sometimes stood and waited for weeks in the slave dungeons, where even today the sludge of feces is 3 to 4 foot thick. In surviving the Ma'afa, this horrible middle passage in which the sharks followed the slave ships, and the migration routes of the charts were changed during the 300 to 400 years of slave trading. What allowed my people to survive? What allowed them to come off the boat, able to do anything, not permanently damaged? I think it's because in the dark of those homes, somebody moaned, somebody cried out, and somebody else moaned, and somebody cried out. And that in that humanity, in that crying out, even for people who believed that if the proper rights were not set over them, that they would never enter the hereafter, that they would never come to rebirth, that it is these strong, powerful technologies, these drumming rhythms, these intricate named patterns survived from Africa to the Americas, from Africa to the Caribbean, from Africa to wherever in the diaspora people were taken. And song and music have, besides the issue of work in Africa, are also used to say what is going on. Issei Barnwell lectured here about a week ago, and she talked about how from the African sense, music is functional. It is not unfunctional. It is not for no reason, whether it is work or play or satirizing. One of the things that often is talked about in Africa is the status of women. And often the rape of women in this century is said to be some of the worst in the world. And is often used as a, oh, we need to save those poor women over there. And yes, there is struggle, but Africa is also home to this rich, rich tradition of resistance and this rich, rich tradition of complementarity. So that in the African world sense, it's not so much about the doings of individuals. It is about the doings of the collective, and it is about lineage and age groups and all of those things that come together. So the saying, as opposed to, I think, therefore I am, the saying is, I am because we are. And it is this notion of collectivity which crossed the waters and became enshrined at the African American experience, in which we talk about lifting as we climb, each one, teach one, that there is a responsibility not only to those who came before, but those who are coming after. In terms of women, this complementarity, so that women's power is not necessarily held in the individual, it is held in the collective, so that if a man is beating his wife, if women are being troubled as they go on these mile-long treks to gather water, women as a group, the women's society, could come and sing satirical songs outside a man's house. They could, and this is up through the 1920s, they could tear his house down. And in fact, they could kill him if the women's society decided that. This is among the Igbo in Nigeria. We hear of the tradition of queen mothers, and again, we have this problem of linguistics. So when we translate that into English, we think, oh, the mother of the king. Well, that's not exactly what it is. In Western America, we talk about mother as a lesser role. To be a mother is to be confined to the domestic sphere. But in Africa, because again, in so many societies, we want to have children. We want to return to this plane. Motherhood and fatherhood are linked to divine relationship, harmony with what is. So to be a mother or a father is to have the authority, the empowerment, the knowledge to take leadership in other fields. So among the Yoruba, there is a term, Iyalode, mother of the outside. It is the term for the woman who holds power in the outside realm. So it's a term for the chief market woman. It is the term for the chief priestess. And in some of these traditions, if the chief priestess does not crown the king cannot be crowned. And so we think, when this again is translated, oh, well, what if it doesn't seem to make much sense to us? But think about what it would mean in the U.S. if one whole branch of the government could not take its rightful place in the realm of making the government run. So mothers of the outside, queen mothers, in some tradition it is the queen mother who selects the next king, who selects the king not out of her sons or her lineage, but out of a lineage that's close to her. What nephews? Who are the people most involved? So this notion of women holding power is very, very strong. And because there is so much about female genital excision and all of these, we hear the ways that African society traditionally has been harmful to women. We don't often hear about how African traditions supported women. So that, we think, oh, feminism was invented in the US in the 1970s and everybody should go out and tell women in the world how they were oppressed. And it's not necessarily that way. In some of the societies of West Africa, if you were a market woman, your money was yours. You went to the market, you traded. Among the Igbo, it is felt that business acumen, the ability to succeed, to think, to be businesslike, is a feminine trait. And I'm talking about feminine as what are the socially assigned roles, tropes, responsibilities, powers that belong in the feminine sphere. We certainly hear about relations where female genitals are cut off and excised, but we don't hear about the societies where, in fact, when from the time of about 10, 13, we started pulling on the labor. These are societies in Central Africa, because in fact, that was desirable. And that even though the rapes in the Congo these days are particularly terrible, that part of this is an attempt to destroy a very, very deep underlaying of respect for the tremendous spiritual, physical, and material power of woman in her role as birth giver. So that we certainly read about, there was this women's war in which, this is in the 1930s, the British were going to put a tax on the market women, and the women stripped naked and walked through the market, and there was no more talk of a tax. This also happened more recently with Shell Oil. The issue is that the most extreme power in some societies is the power of woman who carries with her the spirit conferred power of living and dying. Among you, probably everybody has seen some images of Yoruba art where you often see a kneeling woman and she's semi-naked and she's holding, a stool or a plank, and then on that plank are images of the sacred ancestors. One of the things that's said is, one, that position is the power, is the culturally appropriate power of birthing, standing, a semi-squat standing in this way. It's also said it's a posture that is most appealing to spirit. It is a reminder to spirit that the power of women is very close to the power of spirit. And we have these instances that come up from Ivory Coast, from Nigeria, from the Civil War in Liberia, a woman threatening to unveil, to take off their clothes. In our country, a woman takes off her clothes as a form of protest, and she's going to be surrounded by men and possibly raped. This doesn't happen there. And this phenomena, I brought an article, I'm not going to try and quote from it, but the woman was doing research up through 2003, 2007, 2009. So these notions of the inherent power of the female body. And when I was in Beijing at the World Health Conference on the Status of Women, and talked to, women, one of the things that we heard is that the Somali women said they have a custom, it's called face stripping, and with it they can herd the fighting warlords back into the peace room. So again, what do I want to say about Africa is that instead of looking at Africa as this place over there that needs Western thinking, that we need to think about how is it that people learned and trained in Africa? How did genealogists learn and transmit the histories over hundreds and hundreds of years? How is it that there were bush schools, there were conceptual training, there was a recognition of the role of the elders, and that even with colonization, some of these stayed. Wangari Maathai talks about, she's the recipient of the Nobel Prize, and she raised Christian, but she said, my mother always said, you don't gather fruit from the fig tree. You don't cut it down for wood. It is a sacred tree. It is sacred to God. Now the God that her mother was speaking about was the Christian God. But this is a belief, the sacredness of that tree goes way back beyond the encounter, the forced encounter with Christianity. And what she talks about is how in her research she discovered, oh yes, the roots of the fig tree go down really deep. They go down into the underground stream bed. So where the roots of the fig tree spread out, streams come up out of the ground. And when in fact the fig trees were cut down under colonization, that suddenly there was drought, desertification, that things changed. So this notion that what we do comes back to us, this indigenous belief that this whole world is a great ensouled universe, is part of African beliefs. And then as we come to the new world, so to speak, in quotes, we see some of these traditions so that women in African American culture are powerful, have voice. Yes, struggle, patriarchy. Remember, patriarchy is posited to exist at the moment of creation. So that Supreme Being tells the Orisha, climb down the chain, go make the earth habitable. And in some versions there are 400 male deities and 1 female. And in some versions there are 16 male deities and 1 female. And male deities, everybody comes down from the great realm. They're to separate earth from sky, the wet from the dry. They are to make the earth habitable. Nothing happens. And they go back to Creator because this is a divinely ordained task. Now, Supreme Being is genderless. Supreme Being is so far above us in many African societies. You don't even pray to him, her, he, she, it, they, them. No gender. Supreme Being says, what about Oshun, the 1 female? Have you invited her to your councils? No. Supreme Being says, go back, get on your knees, pray to her. Everything that men do, if it does not include women, will fail. So this deep, deep notion. So the postulate that yes, there is sexism, even at the moment of creation, but it is not divinely sanctioned. And then one last thing about, again, what helped African Americans survive slavery? Not just the Middle Passage. So some of it is the singing. Some of it is crying out, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. The crying out, the telling of the day-to-day story, what has been done to us. Being force-fed this Bible, but choosing the wonder workers, Daniel in the lion's den, Jonah in the belly of the whale, talking about Moses going for freedom. My ancestors took a religion that was designed to keep them happy and passive in the face of horrendous cruelty. And they fashioned out of this a religion that honored them. When they say, I got shoes, you got shoes, everybody's in God's kingdom got shoes, they weren't just singing about shoes. In some states, it was illegal for enslaved Africans to wear shoes. They recognized that they were human beings. So these deep traditions that are intimately interwoven with the spirit of the being, no matter all the attempts to degrade them, no matter all the attempts to subjugate them. In a pilgrimage to heal the wounds of the Middle Passage, where people walked through former slave plantations, collected stories, walked through Puerto Rico and Cuba and Brazil and the west coast of Africa, one of the stories came out that everything was done to make the people feel they were animals. Story an old man saying that the slaves were fed at the same trough that the pigs were fed in. That one day, the women left their babies, all of them, in this trough, and it rained, and all the babies died. And the great sorrow, and the great crying out. And somebody, hearing this man, said, what happened? How did they know? And he said, one day they woke up, and they knew they were not animals. So I want to honor and salute this great wisdom that flows out of Africa. I want to honor and salute the struggles, the deaths, the dyings, and the resilience of my ancestors, my African ancestors. I want to say that this whole land would be the poor, this whole world would be the poor without us. And in this institute, which has so much been about alignment between East and West, to call them the other streams of wisdom that deserve to be part of the welcoming table at which we feed our students, at which we learn from. Thank you.